Serious. What has been your scariest hiking experience? Lost my balance and fell off the trail down a cliff. Broke my left ankle. Dislocated my right shoulder and elbow. Came to when it started downpouring. Some kind of animal came and sniffed me, but I was face down. I must have startled it when I moaned trying to move because it took off. I crawled down about 200 yards when I came to a trailhead. A park ranger saw me and radioed for help. She put my arm in a sling and stabilized my leg. Gave me some water. Airlifted to hospital from there. When I was about 7, one of the kids in my neighborhood had told me that he knew his way around the woods and hiking trails by my house. I was a kid and had nothing better to do that day. So I convinced my mom that we'd be fine. After all, my friend knew where we were going. I said we wouldn't go far. And we'd be back in an hour or two, and then off we went. Spoiler alert, he did not actually know where the F he was going. We realized we were lost after a couple hours, and the logical solution to 7-year-old us appeared to be to wander around and hope we got lucky and found the trailhead we came in through. We wandered for a few more hours, gradually losing hope as the sun began to set. I can remember being completely panicked and convinced I was never going to see my family again. Eventually, and effin' luckily, we came across a guy who had been out for a sunset hike, and he actually had a map and knew where he was going. He walked us back to the entrance by my house in the dark. I made it home safe to an angry mother who was about 5 seconds from calling the cops. I was going on an overnight hike in a small wooded valley that has lots of smaller connecting valleys coming off of it. I just crested one hill to find out a grassfire that I thought was small was huge and headed my way. I ended up having to run, and as I came to the edge it was about a 100-foot drop, so I was running parallel with the fire looking for a safe way to get down. I eventually got to a slope I could slide down and escape. Once I got to the bottom, I found out the tarp I was carrying under my pack was actually melted a bit on one side. I left and did not spend the night. I was hiking down a trail in the dead of winter, along a stream. At one point the trail narrowed to about 4 feet wide, with a steep slope on one side and a sheer drop of 10 feet to the creek on the other side. The trail was coated in a sheet of ice. Being cautious, I got down on all fours to crawl across the patch of ice. Not good enough. I felt my body sliding slowly towards the edge. I felt suspended in midair before I fell. It reminded me of Wile E. Coyote from the Roadrunner cartoons, when he looks at the camera and holds up a sign saying help, before plunging to the bottom of the cliff. On the way down, I managed to get my feet pointing down. I landed hard in the creek, making a huge splash. My legs acted as shock absorbers. I clawed my way up the bank, back to the trail, and limped the miles back to my car. I felt lucky to get out of that with just a pulled hamstring. I'll never forget that moment suspended in midair, where I thought I'm about to get really hurt. Same thing happened to me on a rope course. I got dropped by accident and I just had a thought of, oh no, I'm going to fall here. Fell 20 feet and broke my back. It's a miracle I can still walk. One of my boots came untied, so I knelt down to retie it, and took a quick glance behind me as I was standing up. There was a mountain lion creeping across the trail about 50 feet back. I was hiking up a very steep foothill in WA state when the dead log next to the trail started vibrating. I stopped like WTF. Then the ground started to move. 7.0 earthquake incoming. The thing about earthquakes is you're just minding your own business, and the one thing you take for granted, the solid ground beneath your feet, starts moving. It's very surreal. I'm in the middle of the woods on a very steep trail. I don't know how big this earthquake is, the big one. I don't know how long it's going to last. I think it was maybe 30 seconds, but time went into slow motion. Right when it started getting really strong and branches and dead trees start coming down, it stopped and I noped back down to my car. It was potentially pretty dangerous given where I was. I'm glad it stopped when it did. I live in the Midwest, in an area that is not at all earthquake prone, but apparently there is a very minor fault that briefly acted up a few years ago. I was laying on my bed reading the AMA of the Guy with 2DS and suddenly my dog started barking. Then the windows started rattling, and the whole house started swaying. All I could think was, god damn it, I don't want to go like this. There's an old abandoned road behind my house that winds down the mountain beside the ski hills. It was abandoned because no one lived on it and it was costing the town too much money to maintain it, but it's a cool spot to go hiking now. One day I was hiking down towards the river at the bottom of the road. It was full, so all the leaves were off and it was very bright in the woods. I came around a corner to a section of the road that was washed out, so I was focusing more on my footing than my surroundings, but something caught my eye. I look up and there's a cougar frozen in fear about 10 feet away from me. It was probably thinking the same thing I was. Holy F, now what do I do? So we just sit there staring at each other for a minute or two when suddenly a stick cracks behind me, which makes me jump, which scares the cougar. The thing scrambled to turn around and run just like a house cat and disappears into the trees. I turned around to see what made the noise and it's a deer. A refined deer scared off a cougar by just stepping on a stick. Granted, if I wasn't there to put the cougar on edge already, that deer would probably have been dead, and similarly if that deer hadn't been there, the situation may not have ended as well for me, so we all survived based on sheer luck. I was probably 4 years old in the dead of winter at my super rural childhood home. My dog, a large German shepherd, wandered off and I trusted him enough to follow him. My mom didn't see me leave the yard. I think she was cooking or something. Either way, following the dog wasn't the best idea. Once we got well out of sight, he stopped being in leader mode and went into protect mode. He just stuck with me and wouldn't take me out of the woods. I was too young to know to follow my footprints back or anything. And it was dangerously cold. I don't know how much time had passed, but my mom ended up calling emergency services. Cops and firefighters came out looking for me. And my dog almost mauled a cop that got too close to me. It wasn't scary at the time. But looking back, I could have easily died in those woods. I was on a multi-week trip hiking in northern New Mexico, with afternoon showers pretty much expected every day. It was about 75-80 degrees and sunny, but it very quickly turned to dark, rainy, and about 35-40 degrees. We were in a valley on the side of a flat top mountain, if that makes any sense. Our next campsite was over the top and below this mountain. Pretty soon lightning started striking nearby, so we had to assume the lightning position. We sat on our packs and tossed our hiking poles away. We weren't allowed to continue until the lighting was about 1.5 miles away. Pretty soon it kept getting closer and closer until I literally saw lightning strike about 200 feet away multiple times. We spent an hour and a half like this. And as it turns out, the zippers on my rain gear weren't waterproof. Never in my life have I felt the same level of what the hell am I doing here. I have a pretty strong inclination that I used to work where you're talking about. I was leading a crew through a thunderstorm on a switchback trail in dire need of maintenance. And there physically wasn't a place where I felt comfortable telling the crew to drop packs and wait it out. Wet, muddy, steep, dead trees everywhere. The storm was right above us and I braced myself every time lightning struck, terrified for the crew. Eventually we reached a rut of sorts. I ordered the crew to drop packs, and we scrambled halfway up the rut to avoid potential flash floods. Probably the worst spot in the entire ranch to get caught in a storm like that. It was more of a bushwalk. But when I was a teenager I lived near a very long creek trail and empty bushland. Beautiful place. Very hilly and mountainous area with rainbow lorikeets and a dam nearby. My friend and I headed to the creek after school because I wanted to show her a bat colony near the trail. I don't remember if I turned left when we had to turn right or if we turned right when we had to turn left. But either way we never found the colony. This was before smartphones, so we just followed the creek aimlessly for a couple of hours, hoping it would end up somewhere familiar. It was getting dark when she first saw it. A flash of red in the bushes. We have rosellas out here, but she swore it wasn't a bird. We heard rustling now and then, which made us walk faster. It was hard to move fast on the terrain, because the slope along the creek was getting steeper. Embedded in the creek bed were sometimes these huge, concrete cylinders, big enough to stand inside in. Some of them had water flowing through them. Some didn't. Soon after she saw the red flash, we spotted something else on the other side of the creek. It was one of the big concrete cylinders. But there was stuff inside. I thought it was garbage at first. But it was a home. We could make out blankets, a shopping trolley full of miscellaneous items, and newspaper magazine cutouts hanging off the concrete walls. Mostly of girls. We didn't say anything to each other, but we were almost running at this point. We heard rustling now and then, which could have been anything. Plenty of wildlife in that area of bushland. It was maybe 30 minutes to an hour later when we saw wire fencing, and followed it to some kind of garbage yard in an industrial area. Turned out we were a 3.5 hours walk from our original starting point. I'm still not 100% what happened that day, other than the fact my friend was grounded for about a month. This scared the absolute shit out of me as a child. Backstory. Adirondack 46 Air here. Started when I was around 11 years old. I went to this summer camp in upstate NY called Chingachgook. They take you on 3-day hikes into the high peaks, and this year happened to be my first time hiking a high peak without my dad, so I was a bit weary. My dad has hiked literally everywhere I can think of, so I never really worried about my safety when we would go. He absolutely knows what he's doing, and it was usually just the two of us. At this summer camp, they send you out into the Adirondacks in groups of 5-7 kids. My group was all preteen girls, led by 2 female counselors, usually between the ages of 17-19. For some reason this is regarded as perfectly safe and legal, and it never occurred to any parents or staff that a group of teenage girls should not go off into the wilderness alone for several days with no cell service. Anyways, we had been hiking in the Great Range area, and we found a lean-to, so we started setting up our camp. As we're cooking boxed rice later on in the evening by our campsite, one of the counselors spots a bear cub. So obviously, being an 18-year-old girl, she really panicked hard. The counselors were trained in survival skills and all that. But come on, at the end of the day they're rich teenagers, and literally just runs away, leaving a group of preteens with one 17-year-old counselor in a mother bear's territory. Cub is sniffing around our food, so we run off. We return like an hour later to not only see our whole camp ransacked and all our food for the trip missing, but also 3 bears, 2 cubs and 1 massive angry brown bear. She was super displeased to see us all wander into her campsite and literally charged after us when we promptly ran away. Honestly, thank effing God the one counselor we had left happened to have bear spray. All she did was spray it in the bear's general direction and she ran directly into it. We didn't see her or the cubs again. But they are all our food, and like I said, the hikes are 3 days and we had no service. So we basically starved for 3 days. And the runaway counselor still made us hike the Great Range, 4+ high peaks, on empty stomachs. Boy, my dad was so pissed when he heard about that story. Hiking in the mountains at night. A pair of eyes followed us for a mile or so but made absolutely no sound. I have not gone night hiking since. Depending where you were, it could have been a large cat stalking. Sounds like you guys were lucky it only followed. In the 6th grade, our school took us to this sketchy campsite for the 3rd year a row. We all hated it there. There were wasps in the canteen. The tents provided had no flooring. A dinky ropes course for team building. And we slept on army cots that were stiff and hard. Also, the windows of the tents opened from the outside, so you can imagine the fun the boys had with that. This particular year was the final straw that made our school see just how awful this place was. We were hiking up the side of a hill on a real narrow path. We had to walk in single file because that was how narrow the path was. We were tired, sweating, and everyone just wanted to go home. Then some kid stepped on a beehive that was on the path and all hell broke loose. 30 kids screaming and running up and down the path. One kid tore his sweater off and threw it off the side of the hill because there were bees in it. Another girl was bitten on the lip and it swelled up to the size of a golf ball. Everyone was stung that day. And if you didn't get stung, you were one of the kids who was at the front of the line and managed to escape the swarm but ran into a bush of poison ivy. One girl fell down in the middle of the swarm as she tried to run away, and the bees went at her. She ended up temporarily paralyzed from the waist down and a teacher had to go and carry her out of there. Once everyone escaped, they couldn't go back because, well, bees. So they had to hike the rest of the path with their bee stings. Never again.